Next, we have a wonderful keynote speaker. He is called Aram Ananyan, and he is the director of the news agency Amen Press. Today, he will talk about the challenges that media faced during the war, and he will talk about the martial law. So please welcome Mr. Ananyan.
Dear colleagues, I was supposed to be with you yesterday, but due to the circumstances that were not tied with me personally, I've asked you to postpone my speech to today. So I'm really delighted to be with you. It's my third time participating in this event. And unfortunately, this time due to the COVID pandemic, are reconsidering our vision of traditional thinking, of traditional idea sharing. And I believe a year before could have never imagined that the term of social distancing will have a new meaning of our social disruption of all connections. The year 2020 in this regard is very dramatic. For Armenia, it's two main challenges with the COVID-19 and with the recent war. And I believe this is generally the time of reflections and understanding of what had happened and how should our society make recaps and move forward, and even in the understanding of the future of media. Just in a nutshell, to give an overview of Armenia's media climate for all of us to understand my next thesis. So Armenia's media climate is very diverse, and even it can be characterized to be blossoming. What's very important for that climate are that Armenia scores 75 out of 100 in the freedom of internet. It's considered a country with a free internet, and it's the 61st in the freedom of speech, freedom of media. As in this case, it's also geographically neighboring Georgia, and in this list, it's neighboring Georgia. Georgia, by the way, is number 60. So we have a country with a diverse media climate and with a growing sense of self-organization, self-regulation, and traditional outlets are taking the lead in this process. And the Armenian media is increasingly becoming more and more resilient against the temptations of pressure that each and every political party, group of interest, financial group, or governmental organization might mastermind. The most important thing that I would like to touch upon is our mission. And that the most important thing is not to forget about our mission of true reporting and preparing our society to take responsible decisions. And that's the true role of media nowadays, and of the traditional organizations, traditional news organizations such as Amen Press and all the others. Frankly speaking, I would not put the emphasis mostly on the martial law, because for this year, in the terms of regulation, and as I told, the first regulatory attempt to sort of deal with the crisis was the state of emergency that was imposed earlier this year after the first cases of COVID-19 happened in Armenia. And actually it was kind of a stress test, not only for the state system, not only for the healthcare, but also for the media. And there was a temptation to regulate the media, because somebody or the regulator thought that the news about the pandemic might create panical feelings within the society, which in reality happened not to be true. and the fear was bigger than the measures that were imposed. And thanks God, very soon the dialogue, the proactive dialogue between two parties, between three parties, between the society, the regulator, the government, and the media brought yield fruits, and these regulations were terminated. The same happened with the martial law, and eventually, some days before, the Constitutional Court came out with a ruling that any kind of regulation in this area is not to be in place, and that point of the martial law had been suspended. So the diverse media in general had the opportunity to talk about the war, to cover the war, and to cover the war from on the ground and from the ground. And many of my colleagues were on the front line, not just from the Armenian perspective, but also international journalists, international news organizations were represented in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Artsakh, to cover the war from the front line, to cover the war being on the ground. Unfortunately, or it was very natural that our colleagues from international media were denied to have that opportunity from the side of Azerbaijan, and the higher or the higher level of regulation had been imposed there, which in reality had left no choice to the journalists than to come to Armenia, to go to Karabakh, to cover the war from here. And on our behalf, Armenian media appeared to be very comfortable in, if one can call it comfortable, being at the war and reporting, but generally this is our journalistic mission. And when we're coming to this profession, nobody promised us that it will be the easiest one. And all of us came here with a mission to tell stories. So it's not a secret that war is one of the dramatic stories that needs its reporters that are telling the world truth about that humanitarian catastrophe for all sides that are enrolled in the war. So in Armenia, my colleagues did their best to show what in reality the ugly face of war is there on the ground. I prepared several pages of the text, but eventually I'm not going to read it, because it's in reality very early to come out with a full reflection of war and of war journalism. Generally, it was an opportunity, or it was another stress test for the Armenian journalistic community to cover this events, because the belligerent actions of the sort happened in the region 29 years ago, and to this new generation of my colleagues, this was the practical implication of what they have heard from their elder colleagues. And there is another peculiarity also, that this war was happening, it will be a little bit of grotesque, but it was happening kind of in a world of broadband and in a world of new technologies, when events that were happening on the ground were appearing on the net and on the news wires, if not live, but immediately in several hours. And this was another challenge or another phase of new war reporting. And I believe that what happened in Karabakh in the terms of journalistic work still will be considered as a case study for the researchers sometime later on. The issue we have seen here, and the issue that was very alarming, was connected with the safety of the journalists. So we observed in the first weeks of the war that Azerbaijani armed forces targeted the special buses, minivans of the journalists with the press signs, and they were not military targets, they were not belligerent targets, and they were not participants of the war. And it was visible that people, individuals that are targeted are journalists. It is very alarming. It is totally unacceptable. And as you remember, one of our colleagues from Le Monde newspaper had been operated in Armenia later on. He was evacuated to France. The Russian war reporter is still in Armenia, overcoming severe consequences of the church bombardment when he had happened to be at the moment. And hopefully his life is now not under threat, and the situation with him is improving. So in these times of post-industrial world and post-industrial society, we still face the issue of the safety of the journalists in the war regions, and we have to consider that issue to be very serious, because none of the journalists is participating in the war with a machine gun, or not with the purpose to be to take parts, even if, especially when you are an international actor in the conflict, and targeting them is targeting the unprotected civilians is the easiest thing armies can do. But this is not the sign of maturity of any society. That was in reality alarming. Our agency on our behalf did its best to cover the situation in Artsakh, and we are thankful to all of our international colleagues, starting from Associated Press, Reuters, BBC, to the local agencies in remote parts of the world that trusted to our sources, to our information, and did their best to voice our concern over the alarming issues around the world in this region, including the humanitarian situation, including the ongoing threats against the cultural heritage sites, and all the aspects of human life of the people who are directly not involved in the conflict, but rather are the victims of the war. This was what I wanted to tell in general, and the last issue that I want to conclude with is an optimistic message. The optimistic message is the following. I hope that we will overcome this pandemic and this challenge, and next time we'll meet in Armenia, in Yerevan again, face to face, and we will have an opportunity to talk about the future of our profession, about the reputation of the news, and about helping each other to strengthen our intangible capital, our reputation, the reputation of the journalism, the reputation of reporting in this new world of fake news, manipulation, and many temptations to make something different out of journalistic missions. Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure and a privilege to be with you. Thank you for your patience. I am very happy to see inverted commas, many familiar faces in the list of participants, and I hope to see you all shortly. If there are any issues that I can clarify, feel free to ask during the Q&A session or now. Thank you very much indeed for your invitation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ananyan, for your explicit words. And I think we all share the hope you expressed in the end. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Ananyan?
Да, если можно.
Yeah, Mr. Daniluk, yes, please.
Да, здравствуй, дорогой Арам. У меня краткий вопрос. Скажите, пожалуйста, у вас очень сильное присутствие российских СМИ в Армении. И мне интересно, как вы оцениваете, как они освещают вот эту войну?
Спасибо. Очень приятно видеть вас, господин Данилюк. Хотел бы, чтобы мы встретились в Ереване в действительности, чтобы смогли подольше обсуждать этот вопрос. Да, вы правы, российские СМИ уделяют очень большое внимание этому вопросу. Тут очень много...
There are many war reporters from Russia who covered the war. Well, in general, we observed a more or less balanced position or work of Russian mass media. There was one misunderstanding, if I'm not mistaken, with Ilya Azar. It was not really clear to me. He was deprived of accreditation. I don't know why. It was unclear to me because, you know, sending a journalist back when he is covering the war makes no sense. It doesn't solve anything because in the 21st century, you cannot make a secret because it will be revealed sooner or later. So Russian journalists had more opportunities to work from the side of Armenia than from the side of Azerbaijan partners because we had better system of accreditation, and there they had less opportunities to come to the front line. On the other hand, I understand the interest of the Russian colleagues because the region of South Caucasus is quite important for Russia and the processes that are happening here and the involvement of Turkey in the conflict and involvement of Middle East mercenaries from ultra Islamist and jihadist organizations raised certain concerns in Russia. So that's why they wanted to come and cover the conflict. In general, I evaluate the work of any media positively. To be honest, I didn't see any propagandistic incline in their work. Well, I understand your question, but I want to be really honest with you. They just did their work honestly. They just did their job. There are no any like special claims to coverage. Yes, this is war. There are some points when people are tempted to be the quickest to report something, and then it could be confirmed or refuted. But I didn't see a lot of refuted information reported by Russian colleagues. It was actually interesting to see the behavior of big players in field because they were like really competing in this information race, and they would just take some words and quotes out of context just to be fast. And then later it turned out that the context of their quotes was absolutely different. But I don't see it as some purposeful bias here against concrete states. I think you will understand me very well because the war is usually very personified. It really touches the people involved. So for the author who is just, you know, sitting somewhere abroad and looking here, you know, he can see it absolutely differently because he doesn't go deep into the problems. And the journalists who work in field, they just had to go deeper into the problems. And those who sit in their newsrooms 2,000 kilometers away from the front line, it is a lot more difficult for them to reflect on the situation and do some conscious selection of news.
Thank you very much. both for the question, Mr. Daniluk, and also the answer. Does anyone have an additional question, maybe regarding this topic, or a question in general?
Nice to meet you again virtually. I have a question. You mentioned the danger for journalistic work in war situations. What do you think after this experiences in this Karabakh war? What should be done, or what can be done to protect journalists' work during this day? This is a dangerous work, we know, but that journalists are becoming targets of military actions is maybe a new phenomenon. I think it's not really new. But what can journalists, what can the organizations surround do to protect journalism and to make international rules for journalistic work in these situations?
Dr. Reslan, thank you for the question. Yes, this is. It's my pleasure to answer to this question, because the direction of the question and where it leads us is the future. Yes, you are right. We are all talking about journalists being unsafe during the wars, and this situation is still on the ground. I think as a journalistic community, we have to be much more intolerant towards this type of actions. Our voice has to be much more stronger, and our pressure over our governments, over international organizations, and over individual countries has to be stronger, either to adopt a convention of the journalistic security and safety in the wartime zone, or to have a special regulation in international law, which of course I believe will not change the situation dramatically, but will voice the political will of the countries and of all actors of international society, of international life, to protect journalists at the wartime. Because in reality, journalists are the only channels of communication for those people who are becoming the real victims of the war. I'm not talking about the armies, I'm not talking about the countries and about the interests. I'm talking about the ordinary people, the civilians who are taking all the burden of the war on their shoulders. And the journalists are the only channel that can communicate that to the international community, to the participants of the war, and they are the channel that can make the war shorter, that can ease the suffering of the people. And in this regard, they have to be safe while performing their professional duty. So maybe altogether, we need to put bigger pressure on all responsible actors of international life to come up with that type of initiative to make in a wider understanding of the countries that violence against the journalists performing the professional duties, especially in the endangered areas, should be internationally guaranteed. Yes, even signing a convention or that kind of document, nobody will become safe immediately, but this is a beginning of a process, and maybe that beginning will lead to another continuation, because each and every regulation is starting from the understanding of the problem, and it ends up with implementation, and the way in reality is very long. So, dear doctor, maybe this platform will be one of the initiators of that type of political announcement of international community, maybe in the framework of European Union, maybe in the framework of OSCE, maybe in the framework of United Nations organization, but with a special emphasis on journalistic duty and on journalistic mission. And maybe this will become a scrutinizing factor for the actors in each and every war to be much more sensitive on journalistic safety issues.
Thank you very much. I also want to emphasize that there was a nice comment from one of our participants saying, thank you very much for your speech. So I think on behalf of all of us. Thank you very much for your time and your words, Mr. Ananyan.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I will follow the discussion as long as it will be possible. Thank you very much again. I was delighted.
Thank you.